Michael Krasny, professor of English at San Francisco State, host of the Forum program on KQED Radio. Forum is a program that is largely devoted to public affairs, news, culture, and the arts. It was originally a program largely having to do with local public affairs, but it's evolved. It's gone through a series of different transformations, and now essentially it's become news and public affairs as well as culture and the arts. But we take up any topic that is educational and of interest to our listeners, which includes scientific topics, includes research in science, and includes just a host of technology, business, you name it. It's like a newspaper. I became involved in radio because I was restless. I was a young, tenured professor, and I was very interested in politics, and I had done some publishing in that whole world, and I thought it might be interesting to do something in broadcasting, and something surprisingly fell in my lap just as I was thinking along those lines. At San Francisco State, where I teach, there was a fellow named Frank Moakley, who ran the audiovisual operation at State, who asked me if I wanted to interview some writers. I lived in Marin County, and there was a little station there that was very small in power, called KTIM. It was an alternative type of station, rock station. And I thought maybe I could do an interview program where I could interview people in Marin County where I lived, not only famous people, I mean, there were movie makers and rock stars and people like that, but find out about people who were doing important work, public affairs type of work.
There is also a terrible harm from over-punishment that affects lots and lots of people and really rips apart communities. We have, for example, 10 million children in this country who will have a parent incarcerated by the time they're 18. So that harm is less visible, and yet it is really important to take into account.
And let me thank you for the call, Paul, and we'll go right to another caller. I'm a literary guy, so I like novelists, and I used to do a lot more novelists than I do now. Because of news, because of Trump, because you put a novelist on, it's usually not that interactive. You know, people aren't necessarily asking questions or joining in an interactive way. You know, people often ask, who's the best interview you've had, or I like to interview politicians, I like to interview cultural figures, I like to interview scientists. I mean, one of the reasons I chose literature as a scholarly discipline is because it brings so many other fields together. You can study a novel in a literary fashion, but you can also study it linguistically or anthropologically or scientifically. I was very involved at State in a program called the Nexa program, which was an attempt to bring science and humanities together, team taught by scientists and humanists. So I've always had a lot of curiosity about a lot of things. I'm not a polymath, you know, I'm not a genius about a lot of areas, but I'm really curious and fairly reasonably learned in a lot of areas, and so those two work well for me. The classroom is, believe it or not, in some ways more of a performance than the radio, because in the radio, I'm less of an entertainer than I am an interlocutor. You know, I'm getting people to talk and keeping a conversation moving and bringing callers in and all of that. It's sort of like navigating a plane or something along those lines. He's going to clean up his act. He's going to get better. He's going to rehabilitate. He's going to be able to avoid violence in the future. We know from reading the story that often it just doesn't happen. It can't happen. Yeah, let me rephrase that. It can happen, but so often it can't happen and it doesn't happen. So there you have the essential. But it's not as big a transition as you think, because both involve certain communication skills, preparation, homework, mastery of topics, or what you hope is mastery of a topic, and coming in and being, energetic and being up, basically. Recently, in fact, a student, a graduate student in a class you came to, said to me, "There's somebody with your name on the radio." I mean, she hadn't made the connection. It's sometimes a bit surreal, I think, to say it's the same guy that's in my dashboard, or it's a totally different role and everything. But some students know, yeah. I've taught a class. It's a 10-week class at Stanford, and there it's in continuing education, so it's a lot of older students. and it's a big lecture class, a very different kind of class. And I'll say to the class, how many of you actually know me from the radio? And almost every hand goes up. But that's like people who are 50 and over, as opposed to undergraduate students. I'm a broadcast journalist with the work I do on the radio. Yeah, even won awards from the Professional Society of Journalists and gay and lesbian journalists and all that for different stories I've done and different things I've brought to the radio. And I've always seen myself as a journalist, even before when I was writing articles for like The Nation and The New Leader and things like that. I was doing journalism, basically, doing commentary or critical articles, but it was journalism. It's journalism. But for a long time, I was an aspiring novelist, and I thought I was going to be a fiction writer. I'm more of a scholar and a journalist and a teacher than I am a fiction writer. I just didn't have the chops or whatever. I mean, I certainly had the education, I had the love of literature, but I think you need an altered state, artistic consciousness to really be what I wanted to be, which was a storyteller, a novelist. I mean, I tell stories more like a journalist. They're not imaginative stories, they're real stories. So, yeah, journalist. Initially, I was drawn to San Francisco State because I was a radical. And it was the year after the strike. And I thought, well, that'd be an exciting place to be. The strike was a black student-led strike. It was a strike for mostly black studies. A lot of the professors in my department were involved, professors who I met and liked. At the time, and to this day, I was very interested in African American studies. I thought I knew a guy named Bob Chrisman from the Black Scholar who was teaching at State. I thought this would be a good place to be, and at the time I had some choices. It's very difficult now to have choices, for an academic career, because people are always interested in what's important about being an educator, what's important about being a broadcaster. I mean, there's certain essential skills, and whatever it takes to come by it naturally. Some people just have it more in their systems than others. There are things I can't do that lots of people can do brilliantly. But, I know that lots of people can't talk behind a microphone or get in front of a classroom and even do any public speaking. It's the biggest fear among Americans.